Good day, everyone. Welcome. My name is Loreto Atamosa, your instructor for JED 5 with the description Readings in the Philippine History. For today's video discussion, we will talk about the second lesson under the writings about the Philippines and its people, which is the Placencia's Code on the Ancient Customs of the Tagalogs. For this video discussion, our learning objectives are the following. First is to identify the changes of the customs and traditions of Tagalog through the age. And lastly, to appreciate the importance of rich customs and traditions of Tagalog people. And so, let's start! So aside from the early Spanish officials, Spanish missionaries describe in their writings the customs and traditions of Filipinos at the time of Spanish contact. One of them was Fray Juan de Placencia. His observations were contained in a manuscript entitled Las Costumbres de los Indios Tagalog de Filipina, or the Customs of the Tagalogs of the Philippines. Now, the purpose of writing his work was to guide the alcalde mayor in the settlement of disputes among native Filipinos. Historians consider this work as the first civil code of the Philippines. And so for today, we will talk about one of the most important parts of our history, which is, of course, has something to do about the pre-colonial history. And with that, we will focus our attention to one of the most important documents that was written that clearly give a description of the pre-colonial life about the rich culture and tradition of the early Filipinos in the Tagalog region, as described in a report made by Juan de Placencia. And so technically, this is about the customs of the Tagalogs. As we all know, during our primary years, tinuturo sa atin sa sibika at kultura yung mga customs or traditions ng mga Pilipino bago pa man dumating ang mga Kastila. Ngunit, saan ba galing ang mga information na yan? Of course, most of those information came from a written report of Juan de Placencia, the author of the Code on the Ancient Customs of the Tagalogs. So sino nga ba si Juan de Placencia? Si Fray Juan de Placencia is a Franciscan missionary, linguist, and writer. He was assigned to the eastern shore of Laguna de Bay. Fray Placencia documented the ancient customs of the Tagalogs, and the purpose of writing his work was to guide the alcalde mayor in the settlement of disputes among native Filipinos. So historians considered his work as first civil code of the Philippines. The manuscript was finished on October 21st, 1589 in the town of Nagcarlan, Laguna. An English translation of his work is in the Philippine Islands by Blair and Robertson. So ano nga ba ang mga matatagpuan natin sa writings ni Juan de Placencia na Placencia's Code on the Ancient Customs of the Tagalog? Matatagpuan natin dito ang mga iba't ibang mga writings that depicted the pre-colonial life of the Filipinos bago pa man tuluyan tayong naimpluwensyahan ng mga Kastila. Ang mga observation dito is about the customs and traditions ng mga Pilipino, including the way of life ng mga Filipinos bago pa nagiging in effect ang mga impluwensya ng mga Kastila sa atin. Simulan natin ang discussion sa mga social classes na meron sa pre-colonial period ng ating bansa. Sa mga napapag-aralan natin, ang pinakamataas doon ay ang mga dato. They are regarded as the leader of the barangay or the community sa ating bansa. They are also regarded as the decision maker of their community. So sila ang nagde-decide sa mga mangyayari sa barangay, kung anong kailangan nilang gawin. Of course, sila din yung nagde-decide sa iba't ibang mga conflicts at problems na kinakaharap ng isang community. Ang mga dato rin ay kinikilala bilang pinakamatalino, pinakamatapang, pinakamahusay sa kanilang community. And so, these chiefs ruled over but few people, sometimes as many as 100 houses, sometimes even less than 30. These tribal gatherings is called in Tagalog a barangay. In addition to the chiefs, who correspond to our knights, there were three other classes, namely nobles, commoners, and slaves. First, let's talk about yung mga noble people or maharlika or mga free people. So tinatawag silang free people sa kadahilan ng na-enjoy nila yung pagiging member ng community without paying taxes or any tribute to the dato. Pero they must accompany the dato in a war, so at their own expense. The commoners naman are called aliping na mamahay. Sa mga tinuro sa atin ng elementary at high school tayo, medyo hindi gaanong nabibigyan ng emphasis ang social class na ito. But if we are to read the writings of Juan de Placencia, he described the aliping na mamahay as the commoners. So according to him, they are way different to other social class, which is the slaves, because unlike the slaves, they are not sold. Rather, they live as commoners in that specific community. And so the slaves or the aliping sa gigilid, on the other hand, are considered to be the lowest class in a community. Sila din yung gumagawa ng mga pinakamababang uri ng mga trabaho like heavy or extensive forms of jobs. Pwede silang ibenta, itapon, ipadala kung saan-saan at pwedeng maging pambayad ng utang ng kanilang amo. In short, hindi nila hawak ang kanilang sariling buhay. So paano nga ba nagkakaroon ng ganitong klaseng class sa isang community noon? Ilan sa mga kadahilanan ay kung meron kang nagawang kasalanan or meron kang pagkakautang na hindi mo kayang bayaran. Ito yung mag-uudyok sa iyo upang maging aliping sa gigilid. Isa din sa mga kadahilanan ay kung isa ka sa mga naging captives or bihag from the other community na kaaway ng isang community. And so, considering na meron iba't ibang classes ang isang community, meron ding mga batas na sinusunod lalo na pag marriage ang pinag-uusapan. Now, in these three classes, those who are maharlikas or the nobles on both father and mother side remains maharlika. If these maharlikas had children among their slaves, these children and their mothers become free. If free women had children by a slave, they were all free, provided he was not her husband. If two persons married, of whom was maharlika and the other a slave, whether namamahay or sa gigilid, the children were divided. In this manner, if the father was free, all of those who belonged to him were free. So if he were a slave, all those who belonged to him were slaves, and the same were applied to the mother. Now, what if ang isang maharlika ay makakakita na pwedeng mapapangasawa niya sa ibang barangay? Pwede bang lumipat ang isang maharlika? Pwede. Kaya nga lang, merong dapat bayaran sa iyong community. Meaning, the maharlika could not, after marriage, move from one village to another or from one barangay to another without paying a certain fine of gold. Failure to pay the fine might result in a war between the barangay which the present left and the one which he entered. This applied equally to men and women, except that one married a woman of another village, the children were afterwards divided equally between the two barangays. So bakit nga ba medyo merong restriction ang paglipat ng lugar? Ito ay sa kadahilan ng ang mga maharlika ang considered to be warriors of that barangay. Therefore, kung lilipat ng ibang community ang isang maharlika, magkakaroon ng paghina ng puwersa ang kanilang lilisaning community. So since sila ay mga free people, hindi rin sila pwedeng pagbawalan. Kaya ang mga dato ay nagpapabayad ng malaki para either mahirapan ang isang maharlika na lumipat at magdesisyon na lang na magstay sa kanilang community. So sa usaping marriage naman, meron tayong tinatawag na dowry. Dowries are given by men to the women's parents. And as for inheritance, the legitimate children of the father and mother inherited equally. When parents gave dowry to any son, and when in order to marry him to a chief's daughter, the dowry was greater than the sum given the sons. The excess was not counted in the whole property to be divided. So if the wife at the time of marriage, who has no relatives still alive, she enjoys her dowry, which in such a case belongs to no other relative or child. It should be noticed that unmarried women can own no property in the land, or dowry for the result of all labors accrues to their parents. Now, in case of divorce, before the birth of children, if the wife left her husband for purpose of marrying another, all her dowry and an equal additional amount fell to her husband. But if she left him and did not marry again, the dowry was returned. When the husband left his wife, he lost the half of the dowry, and the other half returned to him. If he had children at the time of his divorce, the whole dowry and the fine went to the children and was held for them by their grandparents or other responsible relatives. And that's the end of the lesson 2 on the writings about the Philippines and its people. See you guys in lesson 3. Goodbye!